Adana had nowhere to go, and Chidi knew this. He had remained passive when his wife left. He knew that she could not make it on her own, and he was so sure that her family would never accept her back. They had so much to lose, and they did not seem like the type to give up the good life they now enjoyed, all thanks to him. Just as expected, the next day, when Chidi returned home from work, Adana was back home. A victorious smirk tugged at the corners of his lips. "You're back. So, are you ready to take it out?" Adana's eyes burned with fresh tears. "It is your child, Chidi," she whispered. "How can you be so cruel?" Adana was a very beautiful young girl, born into a poor family. Her father was a local bricklayer in the village, and her mother owned a small kiosk where she sold biscuits, sweets, and some other little things during the day. And at night, she sold akara at the village evening market. The family literally fed from hand to mouth. And to make matters worse, they had 11 children, so much mouth to feed. Wike and Ifoma worked tirelessly, yet what they earned was barely enough to feed their large household. And every day was a battle for survival. Their clothes were worn and patched, and their house, a small, nearly dilapidated structure, barely sheltered them from the elements. Despite these struggles, Adana's parents did what they could, holding on to the hope that one day life would be kinder to them. Since there was no money for private schools, Adana and her siblings attended the village public school, where teachers were poorly paid and resources were scarce. But Adana did not let her environment hold her back. She was brilliant, always coming out top in her class. Her mind was sharp and eager to absorb knowledge. She dreamed of becoming an accountant, picturing herself in a crisp suit, working in a big office, and changing her family's story. But dreams did not put food on the table. After completing secondary school, further education became an impossibility. There was no money for university, no distant relative to sponsor her. Adana had no choice but to accept her fate. Instead of wasting time complaining, she threw herself into work, helping her mother at the kiosk both day and night, so that her mother could make and sell akara both morning and night, thereby increasing the family's income. But one day, something happened that changed her life forever. Adana was at her mother's kiosk as usual one chilly morning when this very clean, luxurious looking black Mercedes-Benz stopped in front of her mother's kiosk. The tinted window of the car rolled down, revealing a man behind the wheel. He was well dressed in his white crepe shirt. His skin was smooth, and his cologne was so strong that even from a distance, Adana could catch its expensive scent. "Young lady," the man called out, his voice deep, yet gentle. Adana rose to her feet. "Good morning, sir. What would you like to buy?" The man smiled. "Actually, I'm looking for someone. Can you give me directions to Chief Ozo's compound?" Adana was disappointed. She had actually thought he wanted to buy something. She had sold nothing all morning. But she was such a sweet and kind girl, and so she nodded and gave him clear directions, her voice polite and steady. The man watched her as she spoke, his eyes studying her as though searching for something beyond her words. When she finished, he reached out into his wallet and pulled out some crisp 1,000 naira notes. "Thank you for your help. Here, take this." Adana's eyes widened. That was a lot of money for simply giving directions. Her family could use it. But something inside her resisted. She shook her head with a small smile. "No, sir. Thank you. I can't take it. I was only helping." The man was slightly taken aback. Most people would have grabbed the money without hesitation. Yet, this girl, who clearly needed it, had refused. He nodded slowly, impressed. And with that, he drove away, leaving Adana wondering if she had made the right choice. The man was Chidi, a wealthy businessman from the city. He dealt in imported furniture, running a thriving business that had made him so rich. He had come to the village to visit his uncle, Chief Ozo, but what he had found instead was something far more intriguing. Chidi was in his mid-30s, successful and well-respected. Yet, despite his wealth, he had a problem. He needed a wife. City girls were beautiful, educated and sophisticated, but they were also independent, career-driven, and in Chidi's opinion, too feisty. He wanted to settle down. He was tired of running around with these girls. He wanted a humble, respectful woman, someone who would prioritize family over ambition, someone whom he could control. He had searched for years, but none of the women he met matched his vision. But this young girl, whose name he did not know yet, had left a lasting impression on him. She was so polite, calm, and smiled like an angel. What got to him the most was the fact that she had declined his money when he could clearly see that she needed the money. Chidi decided in his heart that he had found the kind of woman he was looking for, and he wanted to know more about her. A few days later, Chidi returned. This time, he stepped out of his car, carrying a large bag. Adana, who had already forgotten about him, was surprised to see him again. She greeted him with her usual warm smile. But when he handed her the bag, she hesitated. "What is this?" she asked, her eyes filled with curiosity. "A small gift," Chidi replied with a charming smile. Adana opened the bag and gasped. Inside were expensive biscuits, chocolates, juice, canned fruits, things she had only ever seen in movies or heard about from returning city dwellers. I don't understand," she stammered. "Why are you giving me all this?" "For helping me the other day," he replied simply. The gift was too much and looked very expensive. She wanted to refuse, but her mother had taught her that rejecting a gift was rejecting a blessing. So she accepted it with gratitude. Chidi did not go immediately. He engaged Adana in a conversation, and before they knew it, they had talked for a while, and he had learned a thing or two about her, and so did she about him. That night, after the family had eaten their small dinner, Adana told her family about the stranger she had met days back, and then showed them the gifts he had brought for her. Her mother was surprised. She stood up from her seat and started singing and dancing. She went down on her knees and started thanking God for answering her prayers. Adana looked at her mother, surprised. "What prayers are you talking about, mother?" she asked. Her mother stopped and sat back down. "Adana, my child, I have been praying that you find a very rich man that will marry you so that our lives will change for the better." She smiled again. "And now, my dreams have come true." "Haba, mother," Adana exclaimed. "How do you know that he wants to marry me? Besides, I'm not even ready to get married." "Ta, shut up," her father intervened. "You are not ready for what? Is it not your mates that have children everywhere in this village? See, if that man says he wants to marry you, just like your mother and I are thinking, then you will marry him." Adana knew better than to argue with her parents. She was so sure that a man like Chidi would not even think about a girl like her, and so she soon forgot about the whole episode that night. Days passed and Chidi's visits became frequent, and each time he visited, he came bearing lavish gifts for the whole family, including different kinds of food items they had never imagined eating before. So that without even realizing it, Adana started developing feelings for Chidi and always looked forward to seeing him. The quality of gifts he showered on the family blew Adana's father's mind, so that he demanded to meet this young man who was spoiling them with so much gifts that hunger had become a thing of the past for them. The day that Chidi entered the family house for the first time was like Christmas Day. They prepared as if God himself was coming. They cooked various delicious dishes and even went as far as making new clothes. They needed to impress their guests. Chidi came and the family had a good time with him. They thanked him for his kindness towards them, and Wike, never one to waste time, cleared his throat and asked, "Young man, you have been very kind to my family and I am grateful, but tell me, what do you want? A man does not do all these things except he wants something. Tell me what you want." Chidi turned to Adana, his eyes warm and sincere. "I want to marry your daughter, Adana, if you would let me." Wike and his wife did not even hide their feelings or think about Adana. As far as they were concerned, she now had a husband. There and then, they agreed for Chidi to marry Adana. Adana herself did not protest. Chidi was the first man that had shown her this kind of affection. Besides, he had so much money. Marrying him would give her financial security. She would never have to suffer again, and her family would live well. Chidi and Adana got married. Their marriage was grand, the biggest Adana's village had ever seen. To create a good impression on his own family about Adana's family, Chidi renovated their old rundown house so that it looked more like a brand new modern bungalow house. People of timbers and calibers attended the marriage ceremony. Obviously, Chidi was from a very wealthy home. People came to rejoice with them. Many envied Wike and his family, while some were truly happy for them. They were happy that after their years of poverty, doors had finally opened for them. Life turned around completely for Adana's family for good. Chidi was a generous man. He made sure that his in-laws were well taken care of, opened a big store for Adana's mother and fully stocked it with goods. He took up 2 of Adana's siblings' education and brought the oldest son with him to the city to learn the furniture trade. Even Wike stopped working as a laborer. Life had indeed turned around dramatically, all in the space of a few months. But a wise man once said, "All that glitters are not gold." Life in the city was beyond anything Adana had ever imagined. The moment she stepped into Chidi's house, she knew she had entered a different world. The mansion stood tall and proud, its white walls gleaming under the city lights. The floors inside were made of something shiny and cold. Marble, they called it. The ceilings stretched high above her head, with delicate crystal chandeliers hanging like frozen raindrops. Every room smelled fresh, filled with the scent of expensive candles and polished wood. Adana walked through the house in awe. There were too many rooms to count, each decorated with rich curtains, soft carpets, and beautiful paintings. The kitchen was filled with things she had never seen before. Machines that cooked, blended, and even washed dishes. In the massive sitting room, a large flat-screen television took up an entire wall, playing colorful pictures that felt too real to be true. But the most surprising part wasn't the house itself. It was the way people treated her. "Good afternoon, madam," the gatekeeper greeted with a bow. "Madam, what do you like for lunch?" the housekeeper asked, her voice full of respect. Adana turned to Chidi in surprise, but he only smiled and kissed her forehead. "You are the madam of this house now. Get used to it." The title felt strange on her tongue, but she liked the sound of it. Madam. She, the poor village girl, was now the mistress of a grand house. At first, Adana enjoyed the luxury. Chidi showered her with gifts, golden bracelets, beautiful dresses, expensive shoes. Her wardrobe was filled with clothes finer than anything she had ever touched before. She had wigs, countless number of them. The kitchen was always stocked with food, and the fridge never ran dry. If she wanted something, all she had to do was ask, and it would appear as if by magic. Chidi was a very good husband, or so she thought. After some months, Adana began to feel restless. There was only so much eating, dressing up, and watching television she could do. She missed the feeling of being useful. One evening, as they sat on the balcony watching the sunset, she gathered the courage to speak. "Chidi, I have been thinking, I want to go to school," she said, her voice soft but hopeful. Chidi looked at her sharply, his smile vanishing. "School?" "Yes," she replied. "You know I have always dreamed of becoming an accountant. Now that I'm here and you have all this money, I can..." "No," he interrupted. His tone was firm, his eyes dark. Adana blinked, confused. "But why? You said you wanted me to be happy." Chidi leaned back in his chair and exhaled. "Adana, school will change you. It will expose you to the bad habits of these city girls. Girls who disrespect their husbands, who think they are equal to men. I don't want that for you. I married you because you are different. You are sweet, innocent, just the way a woman should be." Adana swallowed hard. His words stung, but she did not want to upset him. "But Chidi, education is important." "I said no." His voice rose, making her flinch. Then, seeing the fear in her eyes, he softened and reached out to her, stroking her cheeks gently. "My love," he murmured, "you don't need school. You have everything you could ever want. I take care of you, don't I?" Adana hesitated, then slowly nodded. He did take care of her. He had given her everything: clothes, food, a beautiful home. Maybe he was right. Maybe school wasn't necessary after all. "That's my good girl," Chidi said, kissing her forehead. And just like that, her dreams of becoming an accountant faded into oblivion. Months later, something happened that filled Adana with joy. She was pregnant. The realization hit her one morning when she woke up feeling nauseous. At first, she thought it was something she ate, but when the dizziness continued for days, she remembered what her mother used to say. When a woman starts rejecting food she normally loves, she might be carrying a child. Excited, she waited for Chidi to return home from work, barely able to keep the news to herself. When he walked in, looking sharp in his tailored suit, she ran into his arms, her face glowing with happiness. "My love," she whispered, "we are going to be parents." She expected him to lift her off her feet, to spin her around in joy. She expected him to laugh, to touch her stomach, to start speaking of baby names, to tell her how much he loved her and their baby. Instead, Chidi stiffened. His arms dropped to his sides, and his face darkened like a brewing storm. "You will remove that thing," he said coldly. The words hit her like a slap. She pulled back, searching his face for a sign that he was joking. "Remove as how, Chidi?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Chidi sighed, as if she were a stubborn child refusing to listen. He stepped closer, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Look, my baby," he said in a soothing voice. "We are not ready for children. Let us just enjoy ourselves first. Then maybe later we can consider having children. Eh?" Adana felt her heart pounding. "But this is our child, our blessing." Chidi pulled away, his jaw tightening. "Listen to me, Adana. I said we are not ready. This is not up for debate, and you will do as I say." Her throat went dry. She wanted to protest, to beg him to change his mind, but her lips refused to move. Chidi had always been kind, always given her everything she wanted, except for school, that is. Maybe he was doing this for them. Maybe he was doing this for their own good too. Maybe he knew what was best. So once again, she nodded. "Good," Chidi said with a smile. The next day, he drove her to an expensive private hospital, where the doctors and the nurses treated her with care. The hospital was clean, the bed was soft, and the nurses smiled at her warmly. But as the procedure was carried out, Adana felt nothing but emptiness. When they returned home, Chidi acted as though nothing had happened. He bought her a diamond bracelet, took her shopping, whispered sweet words into her ears. And for a while, Adana forced herself to believe that everything was fine, and life continued as usual. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months. Slowly, the pain of the past began to fade, but the emptiness in Adana's heart remained. Then, one morning, she woke up again, feeling the familiar waves of nausea. She was pregnant again. This time she hesitated before telling Chidi. A deep fear gripped her chest, but she convinced herself that if she pleaded with him enough, if she explained how lonely she felt in the house, he would surely listen. She was his wife. Surely he would understand. That night, when he returned from work, she mustered all the courage she had. "My love," she began, forcing a smile. "I have some news." Chidi barely looked up from his phone. "What is it?" Adana took a deep breath. "I am pregnant." His fingers froze mid-scroll. Slowly, he lifted his eyes to hers. For a brief second, she thought she saw something flash in them. Anger, disappointment, disgust. She could not say. No, she wouldn't let him reject this child again. She rushed to him, kneeling by his chair, gripping his hands in hers. "Chidi, please listen to me. This house is too big, too empty. I have nothing to do all day while you're at work. A child will keep me company, someone to love, someone to care for. Please, let me keep this one." For a moment, there was silence. Then Chidi sighed and pulled his hands away. "You will remove it," he said. Adana's heart dropped. "Why, Chidi?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "You say you are not ready, But when will you ever be? You have more than enough money to care for 1,000 children. This house has so many empty rooms. I am alone every day, waiting for you to come home. Chidi, why? Chidi leaned forward, rubbing his temples as if she were an annoying child pestering him. Adana, I don't want noisy, messy children disturbing my peace. I work so hard, and when I come home, I want my house quiet, tidy. I want to rest. Adana's hands curled into fists. So that's it. You married me just to sit in this house like a doll? Exactly, Chidi said, looking her straight in the eyes. Her breath hitched. That night, they drove to the hospital again. A heartbreaking pattern. It happened again and again and again. The third time, Adana still had the strength to cry. The fourth time, she only stared blankly at the hospital ceiling, her face void of emotion. By the fifth, she was nothing but a hollow shell. She no longer recognized herself. The once lively, hopeful girl from the village had faded away, replaced by someone empty. She moved around the house like a shadow, barely speaking. When Chidi touched her, she flinched. When he bought her gifts, she barely acknowledged them. Nothing he gave her could replace the pieces of herself that he had taken away. But what hurt the most wasn't even Chidi alone. It was his family. Each time his mother visited, it was to remind Adana of how useless she was. Adana, you sit here every day, eating and wasting my son's money. What do you have to show for it? The woman would sneer, her sharp eyes scanning Adana's body. Where are the children? Are you even a real woman? Adana would bite her tongue, swallowing the truth like bitter medicine. You know the worst part? Chidi never defended her, not for once. He would sit there, nodding along as his mother insulted Adana. Never once did he stand up for her. Never once did he tell them the truth. He let them believe that she was barren. And every time Adana heard those words, barren woman, her chest tightened with anger, with pain, with shame. One evening, after yet another visit from her mother-in-law, Adana sat on her bed, staring at her reflection in the mirror. She barely recognized the woman looking back at her. Her eyes were sunken, her cheeks hollow. The glow she once had was gone, replaced by a dull, lifeless stare. She could not do this anymore. That night, she picked up her phone and dialed her mother's number. Adana, my daughter, how are you? The warmth in her mother's voice almost broke her heart. Her throat tightened and tears spilled down her face. Mama, I want to leave, she whispered. There was silence. Leave? Her mother finally asked, her voice sharp. Leave where? I want to leave Chidi. I can't stay here anymore. God forbid. Adana flinched. She did not see that coming. You want to do what, Adana? Leave Chidi over my dead body. Tears rolled down Adana's cheeks. Mama, you did not even ask me what happened. Whatever it is that happened, you must stay there, her mother insisted. Are you not happy that we are living well? Your brother Ebuka just got admission into the university. If you leave that house now, who will continue training your siblings in school? Adana's hands shook. So that's it. she whispered. That's all I am to you. A golden ticket out of poverty. Her mother's voice softened. My daughter, please endure, Endure for our sake. Pity us now. Endure for this family. The call ended, but the silence that followed was louder than any words. No one was coming to save her. Not her husband, not her family. Absolutely no one. And so Adana resigned herself to her fate. She was trapped. Months passed, and once again, Adana found herself pregnant. But this time, she was determined it would be different. She said nothing to Chidi. She moved carefully around the house, wearing loose clothes and avoiding his gaze whenever possible. He was too absorbed in his own world to notice the slight changes in her body. The way she moved slower, the way she ate more. She held onto the secret, shielding her unborn child like a precious gem. For 5 months, she carried the weight of her secrets until one evening. Chidi had just returned from work when his eyes narrowed at her belly. He took a step closer, his gaze darkening as realization dawned. Adana. His voice was dangerously low. What is that? Her hands instinctively cradled her stomach. Chidi, please. But before she could finish, he exploded. His voice shook the walls, his rage filling every corner of the house. Adana had never seen him like this before. He was like a wild storm, uncontrollable, ruthless. He paced back and forth, his hands clenching and unclenching into fists. You hid this from me? He thundered. How dare you? Adana's hands trembled. Chidi, please, listen. It's already 5 months. It's too late. I beg you. Let me keep this one. But Chidi's eyes were cold. I said I don't want a child. Why? Adana cried. Why don't you want children? What kind of man are you? That is none of your concern, he barked. Then his voice turned ice cold. You have 2 choices. You take that thing out, or you leave my house and return to that wretched family of yours. Adana stared at him in shock. So this was it. She took a deep breath, wiped her tears, and looked him in the eye. Then I will leave. Chidi did not stop her. Instead, he made sure she left with nothing, not a single cloth, not jewelry. In his eyes, everything she owned was bought with his money. Therefore, they belonged to him. Adana walked out of the house with only the little money she had secretly saved. As she stepped out of the grand mansion, the place that had once felt like a dream but had become a nightmare, she realized she had nothing except the life growing inside her. She journeyed back to her father's house very early the next morning, her heart heavy with fear and hope. But her return was not the homecoming she had imagined. The moment her father, Wike, saw her, his face twisted in anger. Why are you here? He demanded. Adana fell to her knees, her hands trembling. Papa, I have left Chidi. I can't live with him anymore. You did what? His voice boomed. Her mother rushed out, her face filled with panic. Adana, are you out of your mind? Mama, listen to me. But her father cut her off. No, you listen to me. Do you know what you have done? Do you want to ruin us? Adana's heart shattered. Papa, I am your daughter and I am suffering. He has made me terminate 5 pregnancies and he wants this one gone too. Her mother's voice was firm. Suffering or not, you will go back. Do you think we are fools? Your brother just got into the university. Your sisters are in school. Do you know how much Chidi has done for this family? If he says you should remove the child, then remove it now. She is the father. Remove it. Adana's stomach twisted. So because of money, you have closed your eyes to evil? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. She looked at her father. If you wanted money so much, why didn't you struggle to make your own? That was the final blow. Winke's face hardened. If you don't go back to your husband, forget you have a family. You cease to be a member of this family. And just like that, the door closed in her face. Adana had nowhere to go, and Chidi knew this. He had remained passive when his wife left. He knew that she could not make it on her own, and he was so sure that her family would never accept her back. They had so much to lose, and they did not seem like the type to give up the good life they now enjoyed, all thanks to him. Just as expected, the next day, when Chidi returned home from work, Adana was back home. A victorious smirk tugged at the corners of his lips. "You're back." His voice was flat, emotionless. "So, are you ready to take it out?" Adana's eyes burned with fresh tears. "It is your child, Chidi," she whispered. "How can you be so cruel? Do you not even care how I feel?" For a brief moment, she thought she saw something in his eyes. Regrets, guilt. But it was gone in an instant. "I already told you, I don't want a child," he said. "You should have been more careful." Adana grabbed his hand. "It's been 3 years, Chidi. How much longer do we have to wait? Please think about this." His face hardened. "You will take it out, and that is final." That night, Adana cried until there were no tears left. The next morning, they were back at the hospital. The doctor, an elderly man, warned them that it was too risky since the pregnancy was already far gone. But Chidi remained adamant. The doctor, an elderly man, looked at Adana with pity. Her case bothered him so much. He had been the one to terminate all of her 5 pregnancies, and he could not bear to tamper with this one. He could see the sadness in Adana's eyes and knew that she had no single control over the situation. He decided to play along with Chidi, but he had a plan. Once inside the theater, he dismissed the other nurses, and when he was alone with Adana, he made it clear to her that he had no plans of touching the baby. "You are still very young. You are still a young lady, old enough to be my daughter. Chidi is my very good friend's son, and I have been the family doctor for years. But I cannot close my eyes to evil. Adana, terminating this pregnancy could cost you your life. It's not worth it. It's time to get up and move, now that you still can." Adana cried so hard. It was a difficult decision to make. "I have nowhere to go, doctor. My family has threatened to disown me if I leave him. I don't know anyone. What do I do?" The doctor's eyes softened. "You have me." Adana looked at him, shocked. "I will help you," he promised. I know a good lawyer. He will make sure you get what you deserve when you leave Chidi. But you must decide now. Are you ready to fight for your child? Are you ready to fight for yourself? Adana's heart pounded. For the first time in years, she felt something other than fear. Hope. She took a deep breath, wiped her tears and lifted her chin. I will fight. Chidi was angered when Adana came out and told him to his face that she would not kill her baby for him. His face darkened as Adana stood before him, her voice strong and unwavering. I will not kill my baby. Not anymore, Chidi. For a moment, he was speechless. The little, naive Adana, who once hung on his every word, had changed. She was no longer the scared girl he had controlled so easily. She was standing up to him. His fists clenched, but he forced himself to remain calm. They were still in public. However, as he drove home, his mind boiled with anger. He could not let this slide. She was growing wings and it was time to clip them before they spread too far. But when they stepped into their bedroom, Adana spoke first. I want a divorce. I can't do this anymore, Chidi. For a second, Chidi was stunned. Then he threw his head back and laughed. You want what? He scoffed. You and your family cannot survive without me. None of you can even feed without my money. So tell me, how do you plan to survive? You want to give up all this? He spread his arms, gesturing at their luxurious home. Just because of a child? Adana's jaw tightened. It's not just because of a child, Chidi. This child is my child, and I will protect him or her with my life. Chidi's smile faded. She was serious. His jaw clenched. Then we will see about that, he muttered. Adana was ready to fight for her freedom, but she was not prepared for the war that followed. Chidi dragged the case out for months, using his money and connections to his advantage. He hired the best lawyers, twisted the truth, and ensured that Adana walked away with nothing except her personal belongings. His family, upon learning the truth, were ashamed of him. They begged him to reconsider, pleaded with him to do right by Adana, but Chidi was unmoved. His pride would not let him admit he was wrong. On the day Adana came to pack her things, he stood at the door, arms crossed, smirking. I told you so, he sneered. Let's see how you will survive without me and without my money. Adana did not flinch. She met his gaze, her voice firm. Chidi, you are mean and you are wicked. But I promise you, one day you will want a child. One day not too far from today, you will need a child, and even with all your wealth, you will never have one. You will seek, you will beg, but you will never find any. Chidi's smile faltered, and without another word, Adana turned and stepped into the waiting cab, disappearing from his life. Adana did not return to her family. During the court hearings, they had stood against her, prioritizing their own comforts over her suffering. She knew she had no place with them anymore, and so she did not even bother. But she was not alone. Dr. Ayobami, the kind-hearted man who had once refused to take her child's life, helped her find a small apartment in a quiet part of town. He also ensured she received free medical care throughout her pregnancy. Adana knew she had to survive. She sold every valuable item she had: her jewelry, designer shoes, wigs, bags, clothes, anything she could lay her hand on. She gathered enough money, and with that money started a small mini supermarket. It was not easy. She worked day and night, pushing herself even when exhaustion threatened to break her. But as if fate was on her side, the business flourished. Months later, she gave birth to a beautiful baby boy, the spitting image of his father. Despite everything, she did not regret her decision for one day. Her son became her world. She worked so hard to give him the best life possible. Her small supermarket grew into a thriving business, and soon she had multiple employees working under her. Slowly, she let go of her past and embraced the future before her. She was free. 3 years passed and Chidi's life continued as usual. Wealth, success, luxury trailed after him, but his mother's voice never let him rest. "You have everything, Chidi," she nagged. "But what is all this wealth without a child? If you die today, who will inherit it?" The pressure mounted and Chidi finally decided it was time. He remarried. His new wife Mirabel was young, beautiful and well-mannered, but years passed and no child came. Desperate, they tried everything: IVFs, medical treatments, herbal remedies. Nothing worked. His mother at first was furious. She accused Mirabel of being a witch, and she was sent back to her father's house. Chidi married again and again and again. Each time the result was the same: no child. His frustration turned into fear, and his mother began to suspect that this was a spiritual problem. She did not see this as ordinary. She took him to prayer houses, seeking answers, but the prophets all said the same thing: "You have sinned against a certain woman and against nature. Until you are forgiven, you will never have a child." Chidi already knew who they were talking about: Adana. The memory of her last words haunted him. "One day you will want a child, and even with all your wealth, you will never have one. You will seek, you will beg, but you will never find any." The words kept ringing in his ears. Chidi could not sleep. Guilt and regret clawed at him. He had to find her. He went to her family home, but they had no answers. "We have not seen or heard from Adana since the divorce," they admitted. "We are also trying to find her." For the first time in his life, Chidi was truly helpless. Every day he searched. Every night he prayed. But Adana was nowhere to be found. Until this day, Chidi is still searching. He had no idea where to find her or who to even ask. And for the first time in his life, he was faced with something that his money would never take care of. Hopefully, one day, he would find her, but until then, he would never give up. As for Adana's family, they went back to square one. Mike was forced to return to his bricklaying. A former's large store started folding up because they had to feed and run every household expenses from there. And without the money flowing in from Chidi, they became poor again in no time. Adana's siblings who were in the university were forced to drop out. There was no more sponsor. At first, they blamed Adana for their misfortune. But when they thought about it, they realized their folly. But then it was too late. They searched for Adana everywhere, but no one knew her whereabouts, or even if she was dead or alive. Still, every day, they hoped and prayed that she would come back to them one day. Hey lovers, thank you for listening to this story. If you are new here, welcome to our community. I hope you enjoyed listening to this story as much as I enjoyed creating it. If you have not done so already, please hit the subscribe button. And to support the growth of our community, give this video a big thumbs up. If you know someone who would enjoy a story like this, do not hesitate to share. Don't forget to leave a comment down below. Remember, like, share, drop a comment and subscribe. I'll take my leave now, but I hope to see you in my next video. Bye.